I forgot. I got two. The wires and right set aside. Man, doing my dreams. Or to see the and the last time that Dr. Smith was out there, he was driving with candidates and grandpas.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 1st Rotary meeting. I'd like to thank Alex and Harriet and Rick Prowlis for greeting. Eric Marcus for Ticketmaster, over there still selling tickets. With Ann Winter for all the setup. Pete Bales, Mark Weinstein, and Mike Swick for the great programs. And Jim Gundel for the website. So with Cindy Jarvie, if you're available, well, give us the invitation.
Well, good afternoon. Would you please join me in prayer? Oh, Holy Creator, as we begin this time together, we are mindful of those in the world that are experiencing floods, famine, war, disruptions of all sorts. Those who are in the midst of a difficult event, be it rescue workers, government leaders around the world, as they assess and begin to work through these tragedies, give them wisdom and be with the individuals who are suffering. So show us the way that we can be helpful. Amen.
Thank you, Denny. Secretary's report, Joe Jenkins.
So we're at 59% today. We have a couple guests. You have a couple guests?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm saying, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm doing too many things. These are two professors at Wright State. I skipped the answer. Please say your name.
Hi, I'm Sandy Banerjee, CS professor from Wright State. Thank you, Don.
I'm Will Romain, biology professor at Wright State.
Glad you're here.
Mark Weinstein, okay?
Sure.
Well, I'll introduce the speaker later, but Donna Saraga is with me today. She's the president of the Xenia Chamber of Commerce. And a Xenia Rotarian.
Jenny, we have a guest?
My guest today is my lovely wife, Becky.
Got an application, Josh Eisen, did submit his application, to be a return.
All right, Chris Hadley, are you available? Okay.
I did talk to stuff. You come in here, you're already.
Great, there, man. Had one, I couldn't have Mike off that one.
All right, good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. Hello again to our guest. I will pull a Dawn and forget every one of your names, so I apologize in advance for that. Hello again to our Rotarian apprentices, Amanda, Karen, and unofficially Josh, since he just put in his application, and our incredible speaker who will be coming up here momentarily. Today is the first day of November, or Die-November, according to the Greene County Library's website. It's also the 302nd or 306th day of the year, which means we have completed 84% of the year. So if you're like me in high school and you saw you had a passing grade, you would take the rest of the year off like I would. Good news is we didn't have anyone who missed a partner birthday or wedding anniversary since the last time we met. But to get caught up on some previous birthdays, we had Sandy and Josh Foster celebrate their birthdays last week, and then Jerry will be celebrating his birthday tomorrow. And for member anniversaries, Mick has a 16-year anniversary coming up with his wife on the 7th. Or I'm sorry, take that back. Member anniversaries for Mick, not wedding anniversary. Some good things that have happened today in history, going back to 1512, Michelangelo, not the Ninja Turtle, but the artist, completed his painting on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It was unveiled to the public today on this day of history. It was roughly about 12,000 square feet that he painted. It took 4 years to complete. And just for a little reference, if your backyard is a little over a quarter of an acre, that is how much area he painted. Moving on, 8 years later, the Strait of Magellan was discovered and navigated by European explorer Ferdinand Magellan. 1870, the National Weather Service made its first meteorological forecast in the United States and showed us that weather forecasts are just like baseball hitters. If the meteorologist gets them right 30% of the time, they are going straight to the Weather Hall of Fame. 1897, first Library of Congress building opened its doors to the public. 1938, and these are the words of the internet, not me, but on this day, a undersized, lazy, knobby-kneed thoroughbred known to eat and sleep for a long period of time pulled off the biggest upset by beating the Triple Crown winner, War Admiral, in what was called the match of the century by 4 lengths. 65 years later, Seabiscuit's story hit movie theaters. 1941, American photographer Ansel Adams pulled off on the side of the highway in New Mexico and captured a picture that went on to become one of the most famous pictures in photography. If you are familiar with this work, it is the one that has the moon, the sunrise, the sunset, and a landscape all in it, not Photoshop. It is a real picture that he took with a real camera. And then 1995, the Bosnia peace talks began. Pop quiz, where did those peace talks happen? All right, let's run through some local dominance from the last 2 weeks. Varsity girls soccer, they beat Fairmont in the district semis, but did not have the same result in the finals. Boys varsity soccer, they beat Wayne in the semis. They beat Lakota East in the finals to become district champs. They are now running through the regional Division I tournament and will face that black and gold team down south in the finals on Sunday. The varsity girls volleyball team beat Wayne in the district semis, but did not have the same result in the finals, unfortunately. Varsity girls cross country are the Division I champions. They did that over at Cedarville last Saturday. Now, although the girls team finished second, it was a dual district, so both first and second place are considered district champs. We also had Macy Roberts and Elise Abraham finish in the top 10 individually in that race. They also went on later to finish 14th in the regionals. Varsity boys cross country also had won the D1 championship last week at Cedarville. They won that, and they had Jackson Davis finish third for the good guys. They also took fifth at the regional later on and qualified for the state championship, which is tomorrow. Middle East girls cross country, they took 4th place in the state meet. Maddie James, I think you've heard of her name before. She took second and rebroke her school record. We also had the middle school boys cross country team also take first place at that same meet, which means we have the best boys cross country team in the entire state of OH. Varsity boys football. I want to skip over the last 2 weeks' results because we don't need to look in the past. What we need to look is into the future because for the first time in a non-COVID year, they clinched their first ever berth into the D1 playoffs. And now for some sad or funny or up to you on how you want to take these funny little stats and news articles I came across for last week. So the Chicago Bears became the only team to ever lose a game when leading after 10 seconds have expired from the game clock at the end of the game. If you did not watch that play, it might be the biggest knucklehead play or lack thereof. Definitely check it out. It is one that will have you scratching your head. And to make things worse, the player that was around the center of it after the game apologized for his actions and mistakenly said the game is not over until zeros hit the clock, which unfortunately was not the case for him. We also saw Anthony Richardson now leads the NFL history in most quarterback snaps taken off because he's tired. In fact, he created that category when he took himself out of the game to take a rest. But luckily, he came back in and finished the rest of the game. Unfortunately, a few days later, he found out that he's going to be benched this Sunday and replaced by recent Cleveland Browns legend Joe Flacco. Now, disclaimer, the following information is provided strictly for entertainment. This is not a substitute for professional gambling advice, and decisions based on this content is entirely at its own risk. So far this year, all 8 of the Arizona Cardinals opponents have gone on to win every game the following week after playing the Cardinals. The record for most opponents to win the following week in NFL history was set back in 1993 at 11, and it was set by Cincinnati Bengals. Moving on to baseball, we also saw the Dodgers win their 8th World Series, but we also saw for the 5th straight year that there has been somebody on the World Series winning team named Will Smith. And just for clarity, there's 2 separate Will Smiths that have helped that 5-year streak stay alive. And then we also saw that you don't have to play in the World Series to get a ring. In fact, Taylor Trammell became a World Series champion before the series even started. That's because he played for both the Dodgers and the Yankees this year for a combined total of 10 games before being sent to the minors through the Yankees. So for all those that have youth playing baseball in your family, be sure to encourage them to play for as many championship contenders when they hit the majors. So you can have a Super Bowl, or not Super Bowl, but a World Series champion in your household. Now let's fly through some things to celebrate this week and weekend. Now, of course, we are right in the very beginning of November, which is Lung Cancer Awareness Month, National Rice Awareness Month, Eye Donor Awareness Month, Adopt a Turkey Month, which for obvious reasons. Josh, you'll love these. We've got National Home Care and Hospice Month and National Family Caregiver Month. I believe this one was in honor of Shannon. It's National Repair Done Right Month. We have Military Family Month. Dawn, I believe the Wright V Flyer will be celebrating Aviation History Month this month. We also have Adoption Month. Today, you can also celebrate Love Your Lawyer Month. We also have National Family Literacy Day and National Family Literacy Month starting today. Big shout out to the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which is huge. And tonight, you won't have to go back and forth with your spouse to figure out what to cook for dinner, because tonight is National Cook for Your Pets Night. Today also kicks off National, and I'm putting a huge emphasis on medical. It is National Medical Cannabis Week. Tomorrow is National Ohio Day and that is for our state, not the slangs that Generation Alpha has started using. And one of the fun things that I came across when pulling that up is one of the fun, popular slangs being used is Skibbity Ohio Riz, which is an insult meaning a weird person who does not have the ability to flirt. So if you want to use that on your teenage kids, by all means, they'll probably will blow their mind and they'll have no idea where you learned how to talk like they talk. But before we start making fun of those kids for the weird sounding words and noises that they make, let's not forget that not too long ago, some of us in this room were using words like Genji, the fuzz, jive, wig chop, passion pit, and backseat bingo. For those last two, those are borrowing my time, so I don't know what definitions are, but if you want to chime in on Happy Bugs and let us all know, be my guest. Sunday, we gain an hour back at 2 a.m. And because of that, it's also National Zero Tasking Day, which encourages everyone to relax for that extra hour we earned. Sunday is also Give Somebody $1 Day. Moving on to Monday, we have Color the World Orange Day, which is not about Beavercreek, it is about complex regional pain syndrome. It's also Use Your Common Sense Day, which is beautiful because the following day is Election Day. But more importantly, it's Red Hair Day. And then moving on to Wednesday is Dog Film Festival Day, which is pretty much every day at our house because thanks to Elias, we have Paw Patrol, Clifford, The Sandlot, and now Snoopy on repeat on our TV almost 24/7. And Thursday, back to the spouses not having to worry about dinner, it is National Men Make Dinner Day. And for those men who will be in the kitchen, it is also International Stout Day. And if you are looking for something to do today, Beavercreek football will be having their celebration send-off for the football team starting at 4:30, starting at the high school, going down Fairfield Road and stopping at and not on State Route 35. Now for today's five, since we have to make up for last week, I'm going to add a few extra ones on here. And also get a head start on celebrating Give Somebody $1 Day. So if you're not wearing your badge, that's the $1. For those of you who were late, obviously that is $1. With fall sports wrapping up, if you have not gone out to watch any of our Beavercreek Beavers kick butt this season, that'll be $1. If you have never insulted somebody by calling them Ohio, that's $1. Okay, do not get $1 for this. If you have not shown love to any lawyers today, that's $1. And lastly, in honor of an incredible human, Rotarian, and Beavercreekian, that's a word. If you did not know that we had a college football champion sitting among us for decades right here, that will be $1. I love this song.
Very interesting. the rugby flyer will be celebrating, but we won't be flying. Had a little incident here a couple of weeks ago, so yeah. Happy Bucks. I'm hoping that we're happier now than we've been the last few weeks. Joe,
Yeah. Saturday helped fix all the flags. I think it was me, you, Dave was there, Jenny Driver was there, I think, I don't know, Mrs. Somebody, Shannon Graham was there, and yep, Jim Rowe was there, so thank you guys for coming to get those flags fixed, so we can send them out on, Friday, Hope, and they'll be fresh and new. Oops, sorry.
so that took me too, because I was gonna say that. That's all right. Thank you. Anyone else?
Happy Buck for my Washington Redskins, for the Hail Mary completion win again.
What team is that? What team is that?
Redskins.
I still think I was a Redskin myself, so. I can't say the Commandos.
I see it there. First back.
Anyone else? Sure.
I'll give a happy buck for Ohio State playing the worst winning game I've ever seen in my life.
Great.
Tim Parks, our service, I always like to, public service director, so I always think of the old terminology. He is retiring. We're having a little party for him today, so giving him a happy luck on his retirement. So
Very good.
So I have a happy buck both for Dave and actually Randy's wife. The three of us, we chaperoned a junior high dance last weekend, so we heard all kinds of that junior high slang about friends. We survived.
Yeah, that's scaring me. Listen to that. It's just. What else? Shannon.
More of a public service announcement. Jeremy Trayvine, where it crosses 35, saw my first accident there last night. The light is on. So don't just blow across the bridge.
Yeah, our public service crew had a little accident out there. Semi ran into one of our trucks this morning, so everybody's okay. So that was the best. Anyone else? You know how we made just take a drawing. Since our non-residents class up here. So, probably when I get to find out. And proceeds, let's go to our Christmas basket program. Winning number is 117. I think everybody's got that. 57. Comes at 56.
Right.
You win now. We are looking for you very much. All right. Montrose. Joe, you're still in. But Joe, I say that because Joe won the last two that lasted over a year, so it's. Announcements, anything for announcements? There is a sheet going around for creators that we need to get filled in for the next few months. Fill-ins that I would appreciate it. Next Wednesday on November 6th, we'll be putting out the flags for Veterans Day. That starts at 3 o'clock. And as Joe said, they're all brand new flags now, so they'll look really nice when they're up there this year. And then I'll say it again next week, but Veterans Day ceremony is on November 11th on a Monday, and one of our Rotarians will be speaking. Danny Jarvie is going to get up and speak for a while down as well. And we're having the command chief from RegNet as well as the band. So try to come out with that. Certainly come with the flags. And then we'll take them down again on November 13th, again at 3 o'clock. Yes, sure.
So next week, we will have a sign-up sheet going around for the Christmas basket project. Fran O'Shaughnessy and I have been spearheading the project, and it's expanded our role. We are still continuing to work with Dots Market and Beavercreek Fish, but Nancy Hadley has stepped back a little bit. And so we'll be working with all the logistics behind the scenes, but we're on track. We anticipate that the delivery will be December 21st at Doc's Market. All the information will be on the sign-up sheet, but I want to put it on your radar.
Thank you very much. So thank you guys for stepping in to do that. That's a major project that we have. There is one other project we talked about a little bit about. I don't know if we brought it up to the club yet, but the Lions Club has asked that we would help them with the winter welcome and Warninger, helping decorate one of the houses there. They don't have enough people to do it, and we would certainly like to help with them. So I'll try to get something out for a sign-up sheet next week. I just got this information officially this morning, so I will get something out for next week. Anything else?
Yeah, Don,
Yes.
I think most people know Deborah Gross. She sits here. She had some medical issues. Her mom passed away this past week, so there you go. Where
Sorry.
more tough times.
Is she still out of Trinity?
Is she where?
Is Deborah still at Trinity?
No,
She was back home.
About 2 weeks ago. She got back.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Well, I'd like to ask Mark Weisman to come forward and introduce our speaker. I'm anxiously waiting to hear from him because I want to know what's going to happen on Tuesday.
That's right.
He's already told. I don't know if you want to hear. So, Chris, where are you? There you are. Chris, you made one mistake. When you said like today is this and today is that, well, actually today is Mark Caleb Smith Day here at Rotary. So, Mark Caleb Smith is the director of Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University. He is arguably the most sought after speaker at our Rotary Club and maybe the most popular. Ironically, he seems to always come in November. So I think that has something to do with elections. So I'm not saying anything other than come on up, Mark. Mark is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and he does a phenomenal job of teaching and articulating to the media on national topics that relate to the election. And if you're watching the election night coverage next week on WHIO, you'll see him because he'll be there from 4 o'clock to 11. Mark Caleb Smith. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to Mike Zwick for inviting me. Always appreciate it. It's always good to talk to you all, good to talk to any sort of civic organization. I have a lot of respect for what you do. As you probably know, these kinds of organizations are dwindling in our society. And so we need more spaces for us to get together and try to work hard to make the world a better place. And so thank you for all the work. So I want to start out with some rejected book titles that would describe this year's election. So these are rejected titles. Rejected book titles for describing this year's election. First one, The Best and the Brightest. Not the best title to describe this election. Silence. Also, not a good description of what's going on right now. The Right Stuff. Maybe not an accurate description. Great Expectations. I don't know how you all are thinking about Tuesday, but I don't have necessarily great expectations for whatever happens on Wednesday. We'll just have to wait and see. So I thought maybe I could find some movie titles that would be more accurately descriptive of what we've been looking at. So how about this one? It's a mad, maybe a good description. Maybe one from my day called Stop Making Sense. If any of you are Talking Heads fans, this will ring a bell. If not, I make no apologies for my love of Talking Heads. How about The Gods Must Be Crazy? It's probably an accurate description. If you're not familiar with this film, I'd encourage you to pick it up at some point. Or maybe Dumb. You know, I probably should be more charitable, but it's really hard. It's just really hard to be charitable. And so I'm going to do my best to be as charitable as possible, but I cannot make more promises. So let's talk about how 2024 has been different than what we've seen in the past. even though I think for a lot of reasons it's been the same of what we've seen in the past. Let's talk about differences first. One of the big ones was that debates actually mattered in this cycle. Probably the most important presidential debate in the history of the country took place in June because it fundamentally changed the race. We've never seen a debate that sort of exercised that kind of influence. Generally, we look at debates and say they really only confirm our priors. They don't change the dynamics of a race except for in really unusual circumstances. Well, we had really unusual circumstances. So the debates mattered tremendously. Another interesting thing I think to note about this contest, partly because of what happened in June, we kind of have two incumbents running and we kind of have no incumbents running. It's kind of a weird situation. Donald Trump is not the incumbent, but he's treated as an incumbent in some way because he's formerly in the office. Kamala Harris, not an incumbent, but is still in the position of having to defend the record of the administration that's in office right now. And so it's a weird situation. And I don't know if it really benefits either one of them, frankly, but it's just an odd wrinkle to this election that we haven't seen in the past. And as a political scientist, this one really damages my heart, as many things do. But this is just not a policy-driven election whatsoever. I think you could argue that both campaigns articulate policies of kinds, so I'm not trying to argue that they don't have policy positions, but I think the better description is that voters just simply don't care about policy all that much. Voters are much more interested in how these candidates make them feel. And I would like to pretend this is brand new, maybe, but we've been seeing a trend for quite some time of heading in this direction. But I think this one is just the most extreme example of an election that really just doesn't revolve around policies whatsoever. And again, there are real differences between the two candidates, so don't misunderstand me, but I just think those aren't really driving what we're looking at the moment. We've also seen, and we've seen a little bit of this before, but this election cycle, we've had a good number of what we call double haters. People in the electorate who simply despise both candidates. And just don't feel connected to either candidate, don't feel represented by either candidate, have no strong interest in either candidate, and are truly making decisions just based on other factors. And so there's certainly a chunk of the country that feels deeply devoted to one candidate or the other, but there is a large chunk that just feels distaste at what's happening. So it's also true, I think, to say that what we've seen in 2024 is similar to what we've seen in recent elections as well. And so let's talk about some of the similarities. Political scientists, we talk about what we call party systems. So we look at our political history in the country, and we say we've had a certain number of party systems, depending on how you define things, 4, 5, 6 party systems, where typically one party is the majority party and another party is the minority party for a period of years. Usually 32 to 40 years is what we generally see for a party system. Well, the party system that we're in right now does not have a majority party. And so while we usually see a sun party and a moon party, now we just have 2 moon parties. There's just 2 parties that are sort of floating around without either one being able to assert control over the environment. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. We'll talk about some of them, but the consequences of that are that it's difficult for either party to exercise enough power to truly resolve problems. Because they're so closely divided that it's difficult for them to take a risk, because every next election could be the one that pushes them out of power. Well, if we looked at the party system, say in the 1940s and 1950s, occasionally the Republicans would do well. They might even win the White House, but generally Democrats were the majority party. They could actually address things with the confidence of being a majority. But we don't have a party that functions like that right now. There are other elements, I think, that sort of have led to this that we should at least reference. We've seen a huge increase in independence during this party system. So we see a decline in the number of people saying I'm a Republican or Democrat, and an increase in the number of independents. Both parties are much better at polling than they have been historically. Obviously, Abraham Lincoln wasn't accessing the Gallup data in 1864. And so now with all the data they have available to them, they don't make the kind of dramatic mistakes that maybe previous administrations had made that would lead to this radical shift or a realigning election. So, if Herbert Hoover had access to polling in 1928, 29, how would have his decisions been different, which then would have affected whether or not you have a free civil. And so polling, I think, has complicated this political environment because of how, we could argue about this, but how reasonably good it is. We get a sense of the reality of the electorate through polling in a way that we have not previously. What we're also seeing, I think, over the last many election cycles is that our politics has moved from being a local phenomenon to a national phenomenon. So you all are probably familiar with the old Tip O'Neill comment, all politics is local. That's just not the case anymore. It's just not the case. It may be too much to say that all politics is national, but it's much closer to all politics being national. You all would know better than I would in some ways, because many of you are more directly involved in politics than I am. But now it's important for people running for offices like county commissioner to have a strong position on immigration. Now, maybe I don't know what county commissioners do, but I don't think they have a lot of involvement in setting immigration policy for the country. Now, that voters, however, have imposed those kind of things and expectations on candidates because they're getting national information and have a national perspective as opposed to a local perspective. And that's distorting a lot of the context that we're looking at because they're not really revolving around what you might say are the important issues of local government, but they're devolving into national discussions, which isn't always for the best. And of course, the social media landscape has radically changed what we're looking at right now in a way that we just have not necessarily seen. But the last several elections, we've seen social media exercise a larger and larger influence. This is not news to you all, but most people get their information in information silos. And so they have one kind of information that's floating to them. They don't see contrary information. They don't see other points of view. And this makes all sorts of difference in terms of our national dialogue. Effectively, we don't have it. We have two national monologues that take place within these echo chambers, and that's the way that it works, which is part of our difficulty. Yeah. We've seen this for quite some time now. We are enormously polarized, as we've talked about before. I know I've spoken with you before. Polarization is just the phenomenon that we're looking at. I think people can over dramatize this, that we have been polarized before. The 1860 election was a polarized election. After it was over, we killed each other for 4 years. So I think we have had periods in our history where things have been worse in terms of polarization, but they're pretty polarized at the moment. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but one of them I think that we fail to really grapple with is that our ideological and party commitments now overlap almost completely. So to be conservative is to be Republican, and to be progressive is to be Democrat. Now, in some ways, that just makes common sense, but as all of you know, if we look back into the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, there was a good number of liberal Republicans. There was a good number of conservative Democrats. And so liberal Republicans are from the Northeast in the country primarily, conservative Democrats are from the South. Having that kind of ideological diversity in the party allowed the two parties to function together a little bit more effectively in places like the United States Senate. They could compromise because there was some commonality across the partisan borders. Well, that's gone now. We just don't see very many conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. And again, we can argue about whether that's good or bad, but it's just the reality of where we're. This is a famous picture. So what you see is this is the party, the coalitions, and how they've sort of stacked up against each other over time. And so you look at the median voter here in 1994, and you see how the Democrats and Republicans have a significant amount of overlap when we measure the median voters. But by the time we get to 2014, you see the parties drift farther apart from each other. And I think that's only just got worse over the years. Let's see here. Got a function, or did I push something that I wasn't supposed to push?
Yeah. That's the rest.
I'll be your fisher.
Sorry.
I promise, I don't think I broke anything, but you never know.
Is it frozen?
It's possible. It's something that paused.
Oh,
There we go.
nope, I went backwards tonight.
No, you're good. Go ahead, go forward. Sorry. Yeah,
Nope. I'm sorry.
right there.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. So the parties and ideologies have lined up. And that's tough enough. But we've also seen other factors line up with each other in a way that we have not in our history. And so now it isn't just party and ideology, it's also geography, education, and religion that are lining up with each other in these same categories. So now to be a Republican is to be white, is to be suburban or rural, is to, on average, not have a college degree, and it's to be religious. To be Democrat is to be urban, to have a college degree, to be a person of color, and to be someone that doesn't go to church very often, if at all. And so our differences have moved from just party and ideological differences to now those are cultural differences, to where these two groups of people are functioning in different realities to some extent. And so church used to be a place where you'd see political diversity. That's less and less likely now. We tend to go to church with people who are just like us politically. That wasn't always the case. Other organizations tend to reflect this polarization as well. And so our country used to have a lot of small divisions where you have differences on religion, differences on race, differences on education, differences on class. Now we just have kind of one big division. And that's what makes this so complicated. It's a question for many people of identity. So I no longer just think of myself as a Christian. I think of myself as a Christian Republican who's rural, and these things get mushed. And that's what defines me as a person. And that's not the end of the world, but it tends to these discussions and the political conversations, and that can get very, I think, unhealthy. Everything in our society is tending to get more and more politicized. And I think that's part of the struggle that we're having at this particular moment. Let's see. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it looks like it's good.
Okay.
We'll see how we do.
All right, I'll hang here.
So we have had, and this won't be news to you all, we've had pretty static elections since 2000 in terms of the basic breakdown of the states at least. The coalitions have shifted a bit, but when we look at 2000, we see the red, we see the blue. This is the famous Florida-driven election where Bush pulls it out in Squeaker in Florida. But then we look at 2004, you see a very, very similar map, just very small differences. 2008, Obama did quite well. But even then, you still see the basic pattern hold up. Obama does better in the Midwest and in parts of the South compared to previous Democrats. And that's a pretty big win for him. But that even pales in comparison like Reagan's victories in terms of the electoral college totals. By the time you get to 2012, Romney does a bit better than McCain. The basic division is still the same though. 2016 is still very, very similar. Trump does better in the upper Midwest, which helps him win that election. 2020, Biden wins those states back, and we still have a pretty tight election that Biden managed to win. So the basic division has held up since 2000. So our elections have looked very, very similar since then. We don't need to go through all this material up here, but we have a fair number of states that have been kind of swing states over the past several election cycles. At least since 2000, you might be surprised to see Ohio still on that list, but that goes back to 2000. I don't view Ohio as a swing state anymore. It hasn't been a swing state for quite some time, but it was not that long ago, as you all know. And so here are the states that have gone back and forth a little bit since 2000. Those are the golden states there. But even those don't swing as much as they used to. Florida, Ohio, Colorado, New Mexico, those are really not swing states anymore. Iowa isn't much of a swing state. So this map has got much smaller the farther that we go. So right now, I took a snapshot today of the Real Clear Politics polling average. This is an aggregation of polls. You can go to many different places. So this is a bunch of polls thrown together. According to their aggregation, Trump is ahead just by a couple of, tenths of a percentage point. If you go to another aggregating site, 538.com, of theirs, Harris is ahead by a couple percentage points. So the election is extraordinarily close, I think, no matter what. Here are swing states, and this is just based on, again, aggregated polls. Trump is ahead in some of those states. Harris is ahead a little, in Michigan. They're all extraordinarily close. And frankly, this is a coin flip at this point. It's hard to know what's going to happen. And anyone who tells you they got it figured out, they probably are selling you something or running for office. So that's a politician. But it's just kind of the way it is. The Ohio, and we can talk more about that. The Ohio Senate race. So this will be interesting, I think, to many of you. Right now, we have very few states that have split Senate delegations. So you have two senators, one's a Republican, one's a Democrat. As late as the 1970s, we had more than 20 states that had split Senate delegations, and the numbers got smaller and smaller over time. Ohio is one of those. This list is going to get smaller. Montana is almost certainly going to send another Republican to the Senate, it looks like. West Virginia is definitely sending another Republican to the Senate. So this list is going to get smaller no matter what happens in Ohio. There's a handful of states that have split Senate delegations. Again, according to aggregated polls, Brown's ahead, but it's microscopic. And so it's hard to know what's going to happen exactly. This isn't going to be news to you all. But I think the real key to this election is going to be these voters from 2022 who voted for DeWine but not Vance. The chunk of Ohio voters have made that decision. So we're going to vote for Mike DeWine, but we're not really thrilled about J.D. Vance. That's a big enough group of people to swing the election. And so how they vote will probably make the difference on Tuesday. They vote for Bernie Moreno, he should win pretty comfortably. They vote for Sherrod Brown, he'll win. And so how these folks turn out, I think, will probably make a big difference. What we see in Ohio over the last few election cycles is the urban and rural divide is getting bigger and bigger. And so we used to see pretty good Democratic representation in some of those rural counties, and that's just simply gone. So rural Ohio is now overwhelmingly Republican, and that's just the nature of the division as it exists right now. So who wins will probably come down to whether Brown can be just appealing enough to hold down those margins in rural counties, or whether Moreno could be just appealing enough to really hold down his margins in urban areas. And so we'll see how it plays out. So a couple of things as we think about what the future looks like, and I just will be very, very brief here. I'm not going to talk about all these, but there's an argument, this is divided as we are, and as polarized as we are, that maybe we're just one good leader away from seeing change. And maybe we need the right person to step forward, to lead, to make some arguments that maybe would be appealing to the other party or appealing to the middle of the country a little bit more effectively. And maybe one of our parties could become a majority party through that process. I don't think that's out of the question at all, but I think our parties are just so nervous because of the division that exists right now. They're not really willing to take a lot of risks. And I think one of the reasons that Donald Trump's been successful is he takes those kinds of risks and he sort of approaches politics in a way that other politicians have not. But that also is limited him pretty dramatically because of the way that he's done it. And so you could conceive maybe of a sort of politician who could take risks and do it in a way that would be appealing to a bigger chunk of the country. If you look at public opinion polls, there are some issues where roughly 2/3 of Americans kind of agree on stuff like immigration. But the parties aren't always willing to go along with that 2/3 chunk because they know that it could cost them some of their most loyal supporters. And so there's this calculus that's always there that's preventing them from operating on even those issues where I think they should be able to operate. I think, if I could wave a wand, I'd have us know more about politics. You know, the level. I'll just say, when I was a graduate student, my most dispiriting discovery was how little Americans know about their government. Once I started to study public opinion, you start to look at levels of knowledge, you start to look at survey results. You know, if less than 10% of your country can name who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is, if less than 50% of your country can name all three branches of government consistently, you're kind of in a little bit of trouble. And so our level of knowledge is just not high enough, I think, for us to truly hold our public officials responsible. Yeah. So we have to learn more. Now, you know, that's an easy thing to say, but I think that's part of what we need to do. I also would argue that we need to rediscover our social contract. And this, you know, this gets into metaphysical territory, but the fact that we are in a form of government that extends rights to everyone is the basis of our entire form of government. There are rights, we operate based on consent, government secures those rights. It's a pretty simple contract. However, I would argue increasingly on both sides of our polarized country, there are groups who are unwilling to extend the basic rights to the other side. So we're fine if we deprive you of free speech, however we want to define those terms. But we're fine if we want to deprive you of the right to vote. As long as we don't deprive ourselves of those things, we're okay with that. That's not how rights work. Right? We have to be willing to acknowledge that everyone deserves certain fundamental rights as part of the contract that we have. And when it comes to things like speech and press, that's just the nature of it. And so, unless we rediscover that, you know, I kind of have a lot of fear for what might come in the future. So yeah, I think we have some work to do when it comes to just the basics of our form of government. And I think the other thing I should at least reference quickly before I open it for questions is we could be in the middle of a realignment. You know, this one of these eras where you see the party coalition shift pretty dramatically. Right now, I would say it appears that college-educated voters are realigning into the Democratic Party, and blue-collar, not college-educated white voters are realigning into the Republican Party. If those things persist, it will change the parties enough to where we could see some change develop. It could also be that this is just a phenomenon of the last couple of elections. And once we have, you know, things change, things will go back to more like they were 8 years ago or 12 years ago. So the trick with the realignment is it's got to persist over many, many election cycles for us to say we definitely have a shift in two parties. So I will open it up for questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir.
So I watch a lot of political ads.
That's your first mistake.
So I'll watch.
I understood. Yes.
And it seems like most of the time, doesn't matter which side, they're not telling the truth. If I was selling a product and I said, it'll put hair on your head and money in your bank, I'm in.
Right.
And have me take it down and fine me for false advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the political ads.
License.
Money.
So a couple of things here. And I agree with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided that political advertising is a form of free speech. And unless you're willing to curb that, you really aren't going to be able to do a whole lot to curb what you're looking at on television. And so if it's protected by the First Amendment, you're going to have some restrictions on your ability to get at that issue. I think what limited those kinds of ads in the past is that if you just blatantly lied in advertising, you would pay a price for that. Well, I don't think there's any price to pay for that. And so if there's no price to pay for just lying, then the incentive to lie just gets more and more because you want to distort reality to the point where it's favorable to you. And you know, I'm not some idealist. I don't think politicians were honest at one point. Now they're not. But what's changed is their calculation has changed because the consequences of being dishonest are disappearing. And so now what they used to say behind closed doors to one another, they can say it publicly and not suffer any consequences for it. So I think it's just kind of what we're looking at the moment. So, yeah, I know it's uncomfortable and I don't win a lot of popularity contests, which is why I will never run for office. But the reason we have the system that we have is because of us. If we force public officials to behave differently and to tell the truth, they would have to do those things, but we don't care. Yes, sir.
Don't you think that some of it is just partial truths by both sides? For instance, transgender. Somebody doesn't vote for a bill against it, the other side can say they're for it, but they can say that they, and so they're both kind of telling the truth, but they're both kind of twisted.
Yes, next question. I think there's certainly some truth in it. I agree with you to a point. I mean, but I think, I think that we're pretty, I'll just say this.
Say that that's true and get behind it. And that's part of the problem why people are just going at each other.
I agree. I agree. There are a couple of things I want to say. So one is, because of our polarization, we're more and more willing to dehumanize the other side. And so the going at it that you're talking about is more than just they're Democrats or they're Republicans, it's that they're evil or they're even inhuman. I mean, you hear this kind of rhetoric often. God help you if you spend a lot of time online, but it's just full of this sort of rhetoric. And so, we don't even feel the need to be civil because of how negatively we view the other side, whatever that side is. So I think that's certainly one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind, though, I mean, Joe Biden had to withdraw from a presidential campaign in 1988 because he was plagiarizing speeches. Gary Hart had to withdraw from presidential campaign in 1984 because they discovered that he was spending time on a yacht called the Monkey Business with someone who he wasn't married to, and he had to withdraw from that campaign. Bill Clinton was impeached because of his willingness to perjure himself in the context of an investigation over his sexual behavior. Those things seem pretty quaint. I mean, I think society has just shifted in some pretty important ways that have made our ability to hold these folks accountable really, really hard. And so, I don't disagree with you. These factors are much more systematic and cultural. They just aren't political, I think. Yes, sir.
But every single one of us laughed at your opening slide.
Of course. Because, it's painful, but it's fun.
It is. And then, but my question is, you just kind of described the path forward, but why hasn't it accelerated quicker? I mean, why isn't there more of a push toward the center where I think the majority of this room kind of leans towards?
Yeah. So I think that there are mechanisms that we could pursue that would put more focus toward, I don't even know if I want to say more moderate politics, a politics that has more compromise built into it. Let's say that, because you can't really address a fundamental issue without compromise. That's just the way it is. Our country's too divided. You can't deal with education, you can't deal with healthcare, you can't deal with energy policy, you can't deal with government spending. There's going to have to be compromise in order to deal with any of that stuff. And so you need to have mechanisms that elect people who are more likely to attack those problems with a little bit of risk, but also with some incentives to attack. So, if we adopted a different approach to primary, for example, if we, no offense to anyone in the room, if we rethink our approach to drawing districts, because right now we mostly draw districts to keep incumbents safe, as opposed to make competitive elections. And so, out of 435 House elections coming up next Tuesday, how many do you think are going to be actually competitive?
25?
Yeah, it's going to be less than 10%. Right. Less than 43 will be competitive elections. That's a travesty. And so now I know some of it's unavoidable, but we could do a lot better in terms of just basic things. If you have a politician that knows that they'll be actually in a competitive election in 2 years, then their behavior is going to be different because they'll have to appeal their whole district. Whereas now, if I only have a district that's 90% Republican, 90% Democrat, the worst thing I can do is actually, compromise with the other party. That's the death sentence. And so those kinds of things have to be shifted so that then the people you're sending there are going to have a different set of incentives to respond to. So again, but then you have to think, how does that happen? Well, the system isn't going to change itself. So that's, again, we're going to have to push these kind of things through the system, honestly. Yes.
I want to ask you if you know how historically rare two things I see in this current cycle. One, the dominant leaders in the primaries not participating in the primaries at all. Biden and Trump essentially didn't participate at all. And then secondly, the kind of on the moment twist to offer constituencies policy things in the middle of the race. Like, between both candidates, they've seen some soft spot, and I want to make tips tax-free. Sure. I want to give these incentives to this group.
Right. The last one happens pretty rare. Campaigns will often come out with these sort of policy things and just sort of throw them out there with the hope of attracting those few thousand voters in Pennsylvania or wherever it might be. So that's not all that unusual. The Democratic Party's basic decision not to field a competitive primary is also not unusual in the sense that he was an incumbent. It is unusual in the sense of his capacity. And I think that's there should be some kind of reckoning. Like the Democratic Party is going to at some point have to answer for the fact they're putting forward a candidate who is clearly not capable. Joe Biden. Whatever we think of him, and that's not an ideological statement, but he's clearly struggling. So there's that whole thing was going on for their own self-interest, which was its own set of problems. Donald Trump didn't have to participate. He didn't have to debate. He didn't have to do those things because he was so far ahead. He had no reason to do more than he did. And so unless the Republicans running against him were more competitive, really putting him on the spot, he wasn't going to do anything else. And so, again, I think they were just responding to what was in front of them. It's great questions.
Do you think, going back to that, do you think that potentially was a strategic plan and not changing candidates midway, not a end result, but more of a strategy?
I think had they been able to forecast what was going to happen in the presidential debate, they would have avoided that. Because it would have been in their interest, even if Kamala Harris was eventually chosen, in their interest for her to go through a real rigorous process and for her to prove herself as a candidate. And I think you're even seeing now, she didn't go through that process and it shows.
Yeah.
Had she had a real primary to run through, even if she was victorious, I think she'd be a much stronger candidate now. But I kind of doubt she would want, honestly. So no, I don't think it was strategic. I think that they just simply were hoping for the best. And if we give everyone the benefit of the doubt, let's say the president had a really bad day, but that's a pretty bad day to have on national television. But I think even since the evidence is he has a lot more bad days than they let us think.
True.
Yes, sir.
One of the more stable blocks in the Democratic Party is the African American bloc.
Right.
What impact do you think souls to the polls might make? They've done this 4 years ago, the last opportunity to get out and get people voting. And I noticed Al Sharpton the other night on TV talking about revving up different parts of the country.
So, at least since the New Deal coalition, and then more completely after the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, African Americans have been really reliable Democratic voters. I think part of their activity right now, you're right, it's traditional for them, but I think right now they're afraid. Because I think Donald Trump has shown some ability to compete with African American young men in a way that previous Republican candidates have worked with. And I think if you look at Trump's campaign strategy, it's mostly premised on attracting young men who are Hispanic, African American, and white. And that's probably a smart strategy in a way. But the downside of that is those are also the least reliable voters in the entire electorate. So if you come out looking like a genius, but if those folks don't show up, he's in real trouble on Tuesday. Kamala Harris has made a different gamble. She's hoping that college-educated women will show up in droves and support her regardless. I don't know if you've seen, they even started casting some of their ads toward Republican women to vote against their husbands. And it's really interesting. They must have data to suggest that this is a real possibility. And so she'll look like a genius if she ends up getting great turnout amongst those women. Trump will look like a genius if he does well with men. So I think to some extent the gender gap is probably going to find what we see on Tuesday. It's a great question. Yes, last question.
So not for gambling, we're seeing now a lot of advertising instead of being there that are on candidates.
Yes.
Now obviously legalized gambling in Ohio is a big deal, recently. And people are saying that they're using that data to make a decision to see how the campaigns are going. How much weight actually is on that, and do you see kind of ripple effects from that?
I would, yes, the campaigns surely know what the betting markets are doing relating to the race, and they're certainly relying on that data to a degree. I'd be really uncomfortable relying on that data unless I was from Las Vegas. And it's just that, the house always wins here. Like just because the money's going in one spot, that often means the other side wins, right? So that's how they stay profitable. So I'd be really careful if I were them. It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer. It's a great question. Thank you very much. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, but I want to thank our programs group, Mike and Marta and Pete. We have some great speakers coming here, and it's really a pleasure to come and listen to this every Friday. So thank you very much. Book dedication. As I said when it came up, I wanted to explain and make it clear to me how I can vote next week. But obviously, it's kind of like yesterday. It's trick or treat. So. Next week's meeting, it's club administration or not club administration, club assembly. Sorry, I'm going on the wrong thing here. So we'll have different people from our group talk, and then I'll be asking a couple other people to talk about some of their programs. And the other thing I want to say, I'm really glad that Mark got called out of town last week and was able to reschedule this week because it really wanted to hear what he had to say. Greeters, I'm hoping I have 2 greeters that signed up for next week. That's the thing went around. Hopefully it's there. And anything else for the good of the game? All right, look for any programs on beavercreekrotary.com, Facebook. Don't forget about flags on Wednesday. If you all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. To the republic which stands one nation under God, all liberty. Thank you all very much, and have a great weekend.